I said it during the Ryan Saunders firing / Chris Finch hiring with the Minnesota Timberwolves last week. Or was it earlier this week? I can't remember. Time is just such an illusion these days. There's your deep introspective on the Hard Headed Sports Podcast. But regardless of that, I talked about it when the Minnesota Timberwolves fired Ryan Saunders and hired Chris Finch. I felt that the timing was wrong for that firing, and more so with the timing of the fire / hire, is the reality is that if I'm an if I'm an NBA GM executive owner, I'm not taking the actions and the results of this season too seriously, just based on what it is. It's been a season in which, players are in and out consistently. You not only have to worry about your players' health and safety, you have to worry about the other team's players' health and safety. You don't know who you're going to have. You don't know who the other team is going to have. It's very difficult to game plan. It's very difficult to find consistency in practice. It's very difficult to gain momentum in the season. And with all of that in context, it's like, well, you can't necessarily blame a coach for a team's struggle this season because he has no consistency, or it's very rare for a team to have consistency in this season anyways. And a lot of coaching is finding what makes your team the most consistent and what puts your team in the best position to win every single night or every other night or whatever have you. And if you're without players, that just makes things exponentially more difficult. We've seen this when players have gotten injured in past seasons, how much that changes the way a team plays basketball, because it's such a small game in terms of player personnel on the court. Having a big player get injured changes a lot of things. I mean, even just look about this season, how the Lakers have had to change their play style and, fund and go more through LeBron, which again, there are a lot worse options that you could have than having to run the offense through LeBron. But even with Anthony Davis out, the Lakers look extremely different, and they are losing games that they probably shouldn't lose. I mean, losing players affects you. So with that context, and you think about, well, players may be in or out with health and safety protocol. It's very inconsistent to game plan for, and it hurts your basketball team. So when you take a look at the Boston Celtics, which there's been some conversation this week about Brad Stevens being on the quote-unquote hot seat. The Celtics are 16-17 currently. They're the 7th seed in the East. They've lost 8 of their last 12 games. They were on a 3-game losing streak before they beat the Pacers last night. They were down bad early in that game as well. I think something like 18-4 before a 15-2 run put the Celtics back in the league. And Kemba Walker had probably his best game of the season to save that game for the Celtics. But for all the kind of the overarching variables that I just mentioned to begin the segment, I think it's unfair to put Brad Stevens on the hot seat based on what's been the outcome of this season so far. And I will point to the Miami Heat as an example of just what player personnel and consistency can do for your basketball team, because a couple of weeks ago I made a video talking about what's wrong with the Miami Heat. They were struggling. They were in the finals, and now and at that point, they were one of the worst teams in the league. I think they were like maybe 6-13, something along the lines. And in that segment, I talked about how Jimmy Butler had not played. He basically played like maybe, I'm forgetting exact numbers, but it was 4 out of the 18 games he had played. So he'd missed like 12 straight games. Tyler Hero was out. Goran Dragic was out. They were inconsistent with injuries. Avery Bradley got COVID at some point, and that sent the entire team into contract tracing. And nearly a couple weeks later, now the Heat have won, maybe they've won 5 straight, they've won 9 out of their last 14, and now they're climbing back into the standings, and they look like the team that went to the NBA Finals. And that's all because they've been able to find their consistency. And back then, it's like, well, what's wrong with the Heat? Is Eric Spoelstra, performing poorly? Is he, should he be on the hot seat? And, again, it just points to my point, which is like, when a team finds consistency, that is when the product of the team really comes out. And the Celtics have basically had no consistency this season. They've been playing bad basketball. Apart from that, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown played pretty horrible last night. Kemba Walker has been having one of his worst statistical seasons shooting basketball. I think he's at like 37%. So when you take a look at where the Heat were as to where they are now, and now that they have gotten their consistency back, they look like the team that went to the NBA Finals last season. You take a look at where the Celtics are now when they're in a similar situation. They're losing a lot. They're losing games that they shouldn't lose. And the question is like, well, what's wrong? Should Brad Stevens be on the hot seat? It's like, no. I mean, literally, there is no consistency this season in the NBA, and coaches, more than ever, should have a longer leash with their general manager and with their owner because of how hard it is to plan for the inconsistencies in a COVID basketball season. And, the thought of Brad Stevens even being on the hot seat is kind of funny to me. Because he has led the Celtics to the playoffs in 6 of his 7 seasons, and he's been in either the conference semifinals or the conference finals in the last 4 seasons. I mean, there are very few coaches in the NBA that are as good as Brad Stevens is at this point. So, to take, look at their current record and to say, well, something's wrong. The players aren't playing that well. Should it be... Should Brad Stevens be on the hot seat? Is it a coaching issue? It's like, no, it's a COVID-19 issue. It's a COVID-19 in the NBA type of issue. And the thought of Brad Stevens being anywhere close to being on the hot seat is kind of laughable to me because, again, as I will point to, people were saying the same things about the Miami Heat close to 2 weeks ago. Now they've gotten their players back. Goran Dragic is healthy. Tyler Hero has been healthy, and now he's out of the lineup again, but Jimmy Butler has gotten back to being consistently in the lineup. He's kind of taken over that basketball team again. He's fundamentally improved pretty much everything about that basketball team once again after they started off the season just playing horrible defense, not shooting the ball well. You take a look at where they were as to where they are now, and it's like, well, that just shows what consistency can do for you. And it shows how really the point of the blame for, the Celtics struggles is the inconsistency due to COVID and not having everybody at practice all the time and, really trying to get into a rhythm with the players that you do have. So I'm not worried about the Celtics. I think, even at 16 and 17, the East is a pretty bad conference. They're seventh. They're the 7th seed at being around a 500 team, and yes, absolutely, it's below the mark as to what we expect for the Boston Celtics, but they'll end up making the playoffs. They'll end up being fine, I think, and literally once the team finally finds some consistency, once they get some confidence back, because again, the confidence is also another thing too. When you're losing all the time and you shouldn't be, confidence definitely takes a hit. We will see how the Celtics develop, and I imagine that by the end of the season, these conversations now that we're having of Brad Stevens potentially being on the hot seat, we'll look back at this and being like, well, that was probably a little bit too, we probably jumped the gun a little bit on that one. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this segment from the Hard Headed Sports Podcast. You've heard what I've had to say, now I'm interested to hear what you think as well. If you enjoyed this highlight from the show and want to watch more highlights from the show as they come out after the show's completion, you should definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel, and if you're interested in listening to the entire show in its full-length entirety, you should follow the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all very soon.